Buonasera e benvenuti all'Istituto Italiano di Cultura di New York. When I was the young director of a cultural institution in Florence 30 years ago, I organized a symposium on the myth of America. We discussed how the Italian contemporary culture were deeply influenced by the music, the literature, the way of living of the US. The keynote speech of that symposium was made by Umberto Eco. So when I was appointed director of this institute, I hope to invite him again after so many years. Perhaps this time to talk about Italy. I would have preferred any other reason to have prevented me from doing so than his death. That's the reason why I am moved in opening a panel to remember him here in the country we talk about in those early 80s. It seems natural that some people get old and die, and it seems impossible that others are destined to leave us. Umberto Eco belonged to the second group. He was 84 years old, and yet for me continued to be that cultured and insatiable scholar who was the first in Italy to focus on mass media and television, who addressed both highbrow and lowbrow topics with the same serious and playful perspective, and who showed all of us the necessity to strip culture of its pointless complexities and its outdated academic assumptions. I'm proud, as the director of Italian Cultural Institute, to host today to speak about him three extraordinary persons like Salman Rushdie, Siri Hustvedt, and Gianni Riotta, all three in different ways, intellectual, personal, or both, related to him. In particular, the presence of Rushdie and Hustvedt shows how important and beloved is the Italian culture here in New York, not only the old culture of our ancestor, but the contemporary too. And I'm grateful to Edoardo Ballerini, who accepted with enthusiasm to read some pages from Eco's book. This initiative is part of the Pen World Voices Festival, the result of our collaboration with the Pen, I think the first occasion, but I hope of a long series. And I have to thank Jakob Horses, because without his precious help, nothing would be possible. And I thank also Noreen Tomassi, the redactor of Center for Fiction, for his collaboration. How many new friends I found since I arrived here in New York only 9 months ago. And now I leave the floor for some words about the Pen Festival to Gabriele De Ferrari, member of the board of Pen Festival. And then Michael Moore started the discussion. Please.
Welcome. I'm Gabriela De Ferrari, and I'm a member of the board of Pen America. And on behalf of Pen, I want to welcome you to the World Words Festival. And this is a wonderful panel. And Pen is an organization that ensures freedom of speech and helps writers that have been incarcerated or have been silenced. So I hope you enjoy the panel tonight. I know it's going to be very good. Thank you.
Good evening. I don't know how many of you have had the benefit of an Italian education, but for those who have not, let me give you a sense of how it goes. The lesson might begin with a disquisition on a word taken from the figures of classical rhetoric, such as anaphora, metonymy, or my favorite, oxymoron. The professor would give you the Latin and then the Greek root of the word, cite from memory a few passages from the classics, and conclude with a definition that was so abstruse, so complex, that you knew you could never use the term safely again. I'll never forget the lesson I had where one professor spent 2 hours explaining the difference between an Augenblick an instant, un momentico, and un secondo. But by the end of the semester, the list had grown longer in inverse proportion to your self-confidence, and your ability to formulate your thoughts in words, much less sentences, was left in a shambles. So you can imagine how I felt when I was asked to moderate this panel on remembrance of Umberto Eco, the supreme Italian professor, a walking encyclopedia if there ever was one. For although Eco was a man who, perhaps in his own mind, wore his learning lightly, there was simply so much learning, so much erudition, that it would be hard to wear lightly, even on his large frame. And then there was the fact of his having written prolifically on so many subjects, high and low. Which of the many Umberto Ecos should we commemorate? Eco the medievalist, who wrote his university thesis on St. Thomas Aquinas? Eco the semiotician, the author of The Absent Structure? Eco the linguist? Eco the avant-gardist, who was a member of the Gruppo 63, which was trying to sort of free Italian literature and writing from this stricture that it had to be always and ever socially engaged. Eco the expert in communications, whose first job in the 1950s was with RAI, Italian TV, and went on to found not only the first degree program in Italy in drama, art, and music studies, DAMS, at the University of Bologna, but also created the program in communication sciences. Eco the newspaper and magazine columnist who adapted the techniques of literary criticism to comment on popular culture, cinema, TV, with a famous article on the phenomenology of Mike Bongiorno, who was a game show host. It would be sort of like writing your dissertation, I guess, on Alex Trebek. But also Eco the public intellectual with his critiques of recent Italian political figures and movements that shall go unnamed, as well as his constantly reminding his Italian readers of the horrors of their own history, and his personal resistance to efforts to expunge that history from public memory. And of course, Eco, the author of The Name of the Rose and several other novels grounded in his immense erudition. And the list goes on, but luckily I do not have to go it alone. Let me say how pleased I am that all three of you agreed so quickly to participate in this event. You share Eco's eloquence, his wit, am I flattering you enough? And his humanity. It has been a pure pleasure also to read and reread Eco, thanks to the big stack of books sent over by Lauren Vine of Houghton Mifflin Harcourt. I once translated some essays by Eco on the topic of excess in literature. Those infinite lists of opposing hosts that you find in the Iliad come to mind. And I remember thinking that he was a writer who had clearly hit his stride, who could make the hard work of writing seem easy, with fluid rhythms that allowed even the longest and most abstruse sentences to unfold on a single breath. But what I have enjoyed most of all has been speaking with people who knew him. And what has emerged from these conversations again and again is a portrait of a man who above all was an enthusiastic teacher, a true maestro, a man who was generous in the time he spent with his students, his love of ideas, his eagerness for intellectual exchange. One of his top-selling books in Italy, still today, I believe, is his manual on how to write a thesis. The evening will be structured as follows. We'll begin with a reading from, first I had thought of a book that I think is very underappreciated, The Mysterious Flame of Queen Loana, but it was really one thing too many. I have to thank Drenko Willen, his longtime editor and friend, for having provided us with two readings, the first of which is from, let me see if I can remember, the New York Review of Books, actually. And here to help us, or here to give us a little sense of Eco's voice, is Edoardo Ballerini, who is an actor, writer, director. As you will see when he stands up, he also played the part of Rudolph Valentino in a short film that he made. The last time I saw him, though, I think he was having his head blown off in Boardwalk Empire, so I'm very happy to see you in one piece. Edoardo, please.
It's an occupational hazard. If I could just, for 1 second before I start, say that I first met Umberto when I was about this tall. He and my father were longtime friends. He used to stay with us when he came to New York. And it's a very strange thing to be here reading his words and knowing that he has passed, but let us enjoy some of his wit. Peanuts is a little human comedy for the innocent reader and for the sophisticated. In its center is Charlie Brown, ingenuous, stubborn, always awkward, and doomed to failure, requiring, to a critical degree, communication and popularity, and repaid by the matriarchal know-it-all girls of his group with scorn, references to his round head, accusations of stupidity, all the little digs that strike home. Charlie Brown, undaunted, seeks tenderness and fulfillment on every side. In baseball, in building kites, in his relationship with his dog Snoopy, in playing with the girls. He always fails. His solitude becomes an abyss. His inferiority complex is pervasive, tinged by the constant suspicion, which the reader also comes to share, that Charlie Brown is not inferior. Worse, he is absolutely normal. He is like everybody else. This is why he is always on the brink of suicide, or at least of nervous breakdown, because he seeks salvation through the routine formulas suggested to him by the society in which he lives. The art of making friends, culture in 4 easy lessons, the pursuit of happiness, how to make out with girls. He has been ruined, obviously, by Dr. Kinsey, Dale Carnegie, Eric Fromm, and Lin Yuntang. But since he acts in all purity, without any guile, society is prompt to reject him through its representative Lucy. Treacherous, self-confident, an entrepreneur with assured profits, ready to peddle a security that is completely bogus, but of unquestioned effect. Her lessons in natural science to her brother Linus are a jumble of nonsense that turns Charlie Brown's stomach. "I can't stand it," the unfortunate boy groans. But what weapons can arrest impeccable bad faith when one has the misfortune to be pure of heart? Charlie Brown has been called the most sensitive child ever to appear in a comic strip, a figure capable of Shakespearean shifts of mood. And Schultz's pencil succeeds in rendering these variations with an economy of means that has something miraculous about it. The text, almost always courtly, these children rarely lapse into slang or commit anakaluthan, is enhanced by drawings able to portray in each character the subtlest psychological nuance. Thus, the daily tragedy of Charlie Brown is drawn in our eyes with exemplary incisiveness. To elude this tragedy of non-integration, each psychological trait has its strategies. The girls escape it thanks to an obstinate self-sufficiency and haughtiness. Lucy, a giantess to be admired with awe, Patty and Violet are all of a piece, perfectly integrated, or should we say alienated. They move from hypnotic sessions at the TV to rope skipping and to everyday talk interwoven with sarcasm, achieving peace through insensitivity. Linus, the smallest on the other hand, is already burdened with every neurosis. Emotional instability would be his perpetual condition if the society in which he lives had not already offered him the remedies. Linus already has behind him Freud, Adler, and perhaps also Binswanger via Rollo May. He has identified his baby blanket as the symbol of a uterine peace or a purely oral happiness, sucking his finger, blanket against his cheek, if possible with TV turned on, in front of which he can huddle like an Indian. But he can also be without anything, in an oriental sort of isolation, attached to his symbols of protection. Take away his blanket, and he will be plunged once more into all the emotional troubles lying in wait for him day and night. Because we must add, along with the instability of a neurotic society, he has absorbed all its wisdom. Schroeder, on the other hand, finds peace in aesthetic religion, seated at his little toy piano from which he draws the tunes and chords of transcendental complexity, slumped in total worship of Beethoven. He saves himself from everyday neuroses by sublimating them in a lofty form of artistic madness. Not even Lucy's constant loving admiration can budge him. Lucy cannot love music, an unprofitable activity whose reasons she doesn't comprehend, but in Schroeder she admires an unattainable higher being. Perhaps she is stimulated by the adamantine shyness of her pocket Parsifal, and she stubbornly pursues her work of seduction without making a dent in the artist's defenses. Schroeder has chosen the peace of the senses in the delirium of the imagination. It is no accident that Schultz's children create a little universe in which our tragedy and our comedy are performed. Pigpen, too, has an inferiority to complain about. He is irreparably, horrifyingly dirty. He leaves home neat and spruce, and a second later his shoelaces come untied, his trousers sag over his hips, his hair is flaked with dandruff, his skin and clothes are covered with a layer of mud. Aware of his vocation for the abyss, Pigpen turns his plight into a boast. He speaks of the dust of centuries, an irreversible process, the course of history. It might almost be a Beckett character speaking. A constant antistrophe to the human sufferings, the dog Snoopy carries to the last metaphysical frontier the neurotic failure to adjust. Snoopy knows he is a dog. He was a dog yesterday, he is a dog today, tomorrow he will perhaps be a dog still. For him, in the optimism of the opulent society in which one moves upward from status to status, there is no hope of promotion. Sometimes he essays the extreme resource of humility. We dogs are so humble, he sighs, unctuous and consoled. He becomes tenderly attached to those who promise him respect and consideration. But as a rule, he doesn't accept himself, and he tries to be what he is not, a split personality, if ever there was one.
I hate doing introductions because it sort of obliges you to say all sorts of very trite things like a man that needs no introduction, but I guess, Salman, that might just be you. But one of the things that I feel that I have to say, first of all, about Salman is that we really do owe this Penn World Voices Festival taking place this week to his imagination and to his generosity. I think it's been a fantastic gift to the city of New York. I don't get out of the house as much as I'd like to, and in going to some of these events, I sort of feel my brain coming alive like it hasn't been in a while, and I think back to the days when this started, and really thanks to your vision and involvement with all these writers and energy, this is a reality, and I am truly grateful. Anyway, when I told Giorgio, first of all, that you were the first person to come to mind for this special panel on Umberto Eco, he was a little bit shocked, thinking back to rather unkind review that you wrote in another century, I guess, on Foucault's Pendulum. But I had thought of you right away, of course, because at an earlier edition of the Penn Festival, you were on a panel with Umberto Eco and with Mario Vargas Llosa. Could you talk, if you'd like, about the evolution of that friendship and Three Musketeers?
Yeah. Well, first of all, just to say that I think it's been an extraordinary generation in Italian literature to have these three great polymathic writers, Roberto Calasso, Italo Calvino, Umberto Eco, as more or less contemporaries. You know, and the joint erudition of that trinity is very hard to equal in any literature at any time. You know, but it's true. I mean, I really liked a great deal The Name of the Rose, and then probably for that reason I was asked to review Foucault's Pendulum, which I did not like. And I think I wrote probably the rudest review I've ever written of any book. And I had never met Eco at this time. And about 1 week after the review came out, I was at a literary event in Paris, and the first person I saw walking towards me was Umberto Eco. And I was a little afraid. And he was just astonishingly generous. He came up towards me and he spread his arms like this. He said, "Rushdie, I am the bullshit Eco." and then we were friends. And also what happened at that little event in Paris was that Mario Vargas Llosa was also there. And the three of us all got on very well, and we discovered that we had all insulted each other. that Eco had written a very rude article about Mario because Mario's politics were too right-wing for his liking. and Mario had written a very rude article about me because my politics were too left-wing for his liking, and I had been very rude about Il Pendolo di Foucault. So, and then we met and we got on incredibly well. So we started doing events together all over the world, and Umberto said that we should call ourselves the Three Musketeers, and I said, why not the Three Stooges, And he said, no, it has to be this because first we were enemies and now we are friends. And so we did it, we were in Paris together, we were I think in Rome or Milan, I can't remember now. We were in London at the Festival Hall together, we were here at the Penn World Voices, and we became this kind of traveling literary circus. And it feels very sad that now there's only two Musketeers. Yeah. But it was, and I remember going, without Mario actually, I remember going with, the reading reminded me that Umberto and I went to speak in Rochester, New York together as a kind of spin-off from the Penn Festival. And we were talking about peanuts, and as only Umberto could do, he explained peanuts through the use of Heraclitus. What he says is that, when the strip was going to end, when Schultz announced that he was going to stop drawing the strip, he received a deluge of letters asking that just once before the strip ended, could he please let Charlie Brown kick the football? Yeah. And he didn't do it. And Umberto said it was quite correct that he should not do it because, character is destiny, as Heraclitus told us. And if Charlie Brown had kicked the football, he would, in some profound way, cease to be Charlie Brown. Yeah. And if Lucy was to not whip the football away at the last minute, then her Luciness would be lost. Yeah. So character is destiny. This is Heraclitus explaining peanuts. Courtesy of Umberto Eco. I just wanted to say a couple of things about thinking about the name of the rose, and one of the things struck me as a fan of thrillers at a certain point in my life. I read a great deal of Agatha Christie at one point, who was the mistress of poison. Mm-hmm. I mean, there's something like 25 novels of Agatha Christie in which different poisons are used very creatively. It's funny, poison has kind of fallen out of fashion, but once upon a time it was, in the world of Sherlock Holmes also there's a lot of poison, and of course there's a kind of surrogate Sherlock Holmes in the character of William of Baskerville in The Name of the Rose. But the particular poison technique used in The Name of the Rose, which is poison on the corner of a page, so that as you lick your finger and turn the pages, you gradually murder yourself.
Spoiler alert. Spoiler alert.
I have to say, I never asked him, but there are a couple of earlier versions of this. There is in one of the stories of the Arabian Nights, there is a story about, it's called The Tale of the Vizier and the Sage Duban. Now, the sage Duban falls foul of this wicked king and is going to be executed, going to be beheaded. And before he is beheaded, he gives the king a present of a book. And he says, but you can't read this book until after I die. And so then he's beheaded, but his head goes on talking. And his head says to the king, now you must open the book and turn 3 pages with your left hand. And the king does this, and of course the book has poison on the corners, so he licks the pages and the king dies. So that's, I think, the first example of the poison by turning the page. And Alexandre Dumas, in La Reine Margot, there's an attempt to kill the king, King Henri of Navarre. There's an attempt to kill him by the same technique, but it doesn't work in that book. And so Eco is at least the third person to do it, but his use of it is so much better. In fact, I read an interview, there's a famous line of Umberto's where he was asked about the origin of The Name of the Rose, and he said, I had a great desire to poison a monk. and then in a later interview, he said that he was not telling the truth when he said that. But he said that many of his books came from in a way, visual images. I mean, very strange for this very verbal writer. He said that there were always these seminal images from which his books came, and that idea of the page being poisoned, was the thing from which The Name of the Rose came. And when he wrote my much admired novel, Foucault's Pendulum, he said there were two things. One was the image of Foucault's pendulum itself, and the other was his memory of having played the trumpet at a gathering of mourning Italian resistance fighters who had died. And so he saw the novel as being a move from the pendulum to the trumpet, and the question was how to get from one place to the other. And Baudolino, he said, started with the image of the burning of Constantinople in 1204. So it's just really interesting that he said that almost all his books had their origin in these visual images, which he compared to the idea of James Joyce of the Epiphany. The kind of image that crystallizes something. I just think, for a writer of such profound linguistic nature, to have found his inspiration in visual images is kind of interesting. I mean, the international dateline was the thing that inspired The Island of the Day Before, which I do think is a great idea of a book, that you have to swim into yesterday to meet the girl you love, because she's never on the same day as you. She's always on the day before. I mean, that's a wonderful idea for a book. And anyway, I just wanted to say that there is this very visual side to him. And the other thing that obviously I think has to be said, given that one of the controlling metaphors of The Name of the Rose is the library, is the sense in which not only books in general, but actually the idea of books represented by Borges was very important to him. And actually there is in The Name of the Rose a librarian called Jorge, who is quite clearly related to a certain Argentinian. There's also a small character called Umberto of Bologna, who appears in The Name of the Rose. Yes. So there's this personal appearance of a time-traveling Eco getting back into the monastery. And finally, I just wanted to mention that there is another origin point for The Name of the Rose, which is a story of Borges. Actually, probably my favorite story of Borges is a story called Death in the Compass, which is about a detective who begins to find a pattern in a sequence of murders. And therefore is able, after 3 murders have taken place, he is able to predict the place and time of the 4th murder, and decides to be there at that place and time so he can hide, so he can catch the murderer, not realizing that the first 3 murders have been carried out in order to bring him to the 4th place at the right time, so that he can be murdered.
Exactly. So wonderful.
I mean, Eco's detective has a happier fate than Borges' detective, but the sort of inspiration of Death in the Compass is quite clear. So, anyway, I just wanted to make these remarks about his writing and to apologize retrospectively for my view of the name of Foucault's Pendulum, which I have to say has not changed.
When I was hunting around for people to be on this panel, I asked Noreen Tomasi of the Center for Fiction who was the most erudite person she knew, and not to make anyone feel diminished, but she said Siri Hustvedt. And I do have to read the biography because it's so detailed. She's the author of 6 novels. The most recent, The Blazing World, was longlisted for the Man Booker. And for the Los Angeles Book Prize for Fiction. Her nonfiction includes a book of essays on paintings, as well as an interdisciplinary investigation of a neurological disorder. She has given lectures on artists and theories of art at the Prado, the Metropolitan Museum of Art, and the Academy of Fine Arts in Munich. In 2011, she delivered the 39th annual Freud Lecture in Vienna. Living, Thinking, Looking brings together 32 essays written between 2006 and 2011, and I've just learned from her that she is also a lecturer in psychiatry at the Weill Medical School. Shri. And I should say, just when Shri responded to the invitation, she said, she was thinking of the time when she was fascinated by this idea of semiotics. One of those words, I always think of Malcolm Cowley having said that the only comfort he found in the thought of dying was that he would never again have to look up the word hermeneutics. So I will definitely hand semiotics over to you,
Okay,
Siri.
so I'm the person who did not know Umberto Eco, the man, but knew him through his work. I first encountered the work of Umberto Eco in 1979. I was a graduate student in the English department at Columbia University. Those were the heady days of what came to be called post-structuralism, a loose and still controversial label for a number of diverse thinkers, all of whom were deeply interested in language and how language shapes our cultural life. To say that the works of Jacques Derrida, Michel Foucault, Roland Barthes, Julia Kristeva, and Jacques Lacan were fashionable back then is an understatement. The enthusiasm for French high theory at Columbia bordered on fanatical devotion. Although even in my early 20s, my position on these writers was measured by skepticism, I was certainly not going to walk the streets of the Upper West Side and remain ignorant of the developments that seem to have taken young intellectuals by storm. I read my head off. The book I plucked off the shelf at Salter's bookstore one day in the spring of that year was Eco's A Theory of Semiotics. Semiotics is very simply a theory of signs. I had already made my way carefully through Ferdinand de Saussure's course in general linguistics with its famous terms, sign, signifier, signified, signifier, and referent. I had read Louis Hjelmslav, Roman Jakobson, Emile Benveniste, and M.M. Bakhtin, my very favorite. So I was not a novice. What I found in Eco, however, was something different. Here is Eco's now famous definition of semiotics from that book. Quote, semiotics is concerned with everything that can be taken as a sign. A sign is everything which can be taken as significantly substituting for something else. This something does not necessarily have to exist or to be actually somewhere at the moment in which a sign stands in for it. Thus, semiotics is in principle the discipline studying that which can be used in order to lie. If something cannot be used to lie, conversely, it cannot be used to tell the truth. It cannot, in fact, be used to tell at all. I think the definition of a theory of the lie should be taken as a pretty comprehensive program for general semiotics. Eco is not only talking about words here, but his emphasis on the lie suggests that all signs are slippery because they are by their very nature duplicitous, if only because one thing stands in for another. Signs can both hide and reveal, lead and mislead. It is, I think, a brilliant encapsulation of the relation between a sign and its meaning, because when a person lies, it demonstrates that he or she is part of a socially shared code of meanings, a pact which can be broken by the lie. The liar uses the broken code or link between sign and meaning to deceive another into believing something that is not true. Words can say one thing and mean another. I would elaborate in a way that Eco doesn't. Lying becomes possible at the moment in human development when a child becomes able to conceive of herself in relation to another person as an other. Uncertainty is built into the interpretation of signs. For Eco, meaning is not, as in some linguistic theories, a rigid message a sender transfers to a receiver who then decodes it without ambiguity according to its dictionary definition. Further, for Eco, as is true for most postmodernist thinkers, there is no contact between a sign and its referent, the thing out there in the actual world, Kant's das Ding an sich, the thing in itself. Sign systems are part of a kind of parallel universe that relates to the real world but can never actually touch it, as it were. The universe of signs constitutes in itself a kind of fiction. This does not mean there is no world, or as Eco would argue later, no facts or avenues to discovery, in science, for example. It is important to add that Eco was probably less influenced by Saussure than by the great American pragmatist philosopher and scientist Charles Sanders Peirce. Like Peirce, he advocated a broad definition of the sign that was not limited to language and people. Along with anthroposemiotics, human communication, there are zoosemiotics, animal communication, biosemiotics, biological signaling systems, and phytosemiotics, plant life. I think Eco's close reading of Peirce saved him from some of the excesses of post-structuralism, which at its most extreme came to think of human beings as disembodied linguistic constructs. Before his conversion to semiotics, Eco published The Open Work in 1962, in which he insists on both the multiplicity and ambiguity of meaning in works of art, especially modern art, and the collaborative nature of reading. For Eco, Joyce's Finnegan's Wake, with its multilingual puns, a book he returned to in a number of essays over the years, stands as a quintessential open work. I have never finished Finnegan's Wake, and open though it is, unlike the earlier Joyce that I gobbled down with great love, I find his last book best consumed in small doses. In Eco's nonfiction, Joyce's final work, along with Borges's entire oeuvre, recur as touchstones. Joyce as linguistic wizard of ambiguity, and Borges as labyrinthine trickster of intellectual puzzles, rendered, however, in classical prose. When one combines Eco's interest in the open work and semiotics as a theory of the lie with his immersion in medieval scholasticism, he wrote his dissertation on Thomas Aquinas, you can easily see how these concerns are leading us step by step to the work that would make him famous. In the interview he gave to the Paris Review, Eco said, "My whole life I have had innumerable experiences of full immersion in the Middle Ages. For instance, in preparing my thesis, I went twice for month-long trips to Paris, conducting research at the Bibliothèque Nationale, and I decided in those months to live only in the Middle Ages." Then you start to think and feel like a man of the Middle Ages. If you reduce the map of Paris, selecting only certain streets, you can really live in the Middle Ages. Well, maybe if you are Umberto Eco, you can. Nevertheless, when The Name of the Rose was published in 1984 to great acclaim and runaway bestsellerdom, I picked up the book in a bookstore and thought to myself, isn't it interesting that there are two Italians with the name Umberto Eco, the semiotician and this guy, the novelist? It never occurred to me that the two were one and the same. After I had read the book, however, there was no longer any doubt that the two Umberto Ecos were actually one Umberto Eco, and I had fallen prey to a prejudice I detest. The idea that no one is allowed outside his or her special cubicle of acknowledged expertise or practice. I am now ashamed of my bias. I have repeatedly moved among disciplines in my own work. When people discover that I have published papers in science journals, I am regularly greeted with looks of disbelief. The Name of the Rose, with its rational Holmesian figure, William of Baskerville, and his bumbling Watson, Otso of Melk, is nothing if not an amalgam of Eco's intellectual interests, a detective fiction that self-destructs in a plurality of meanings and ends with a burned labyrinthine library and a host of, quote, fragments, quotations, unfinished sentences, amputated stumps of books, end quote. It has rightly been called a semiotic fiction, one that directly engages the reader as a detective double who proceeds to discover not the identity of the murderer so much as the myriad significations that are opened up in the books within the book itself. In The Role of the Reader, Eco discussed two possible approaches to texts in the guises of the naive and critical reader. The naive reader doggedly looks for the answer or the single univocal meaning, while the critical reader is comfortable with the maze-like structure of the text, a structure that inevitably leads to other texts. As William says in the novel, often books speak of other books. Otso plays the role of the naive reader and William the critical reader. And it must be said that the whole diabolical business is a comedy, an ironic comedy of errors, of interpretation and misinterpretation. All of Eco's fiction, if most famously The Name of the Rose, turns on the problem of reading and the search for meaning, on decoding and its proliferating significances, and often the ensuing paranoia. Finally, I would like to say that the novel is a many-headed beast. It is a form roomy enough to contain anything, including scholarly debates, rambling essays, arcane ideas, jokes, hijinks, multilingual puns, deep psychology, shallow psychology, complex ironies, and pure, unadulterated sincerity. It can proceed in a linear way or leap about in time. It includes the digressions of a Lawrence Stern and the complex internal structures of Emily Bronte, Beckett's brevity, and Tolstoy's discursive length, as well as the marvels of Woolf's intimate phenomenology. Eco reminds us that the novel is always an arena of human play and multiple truths. I am sometimes saddened by the provincialism of the American novel. Despite the many examples of brilliant and varied writing, there are also countless examples of dull workshop novels honed according to the rules of some instructor who insists that novels show, not tell, or that dialogue must proceed in such and such a manner. We are treated to silly books about how novels work or should work, and prescriptions of all kinds. In the world of the open work, I would like to say, there are no prescriptions, no rules, no limitations on works of art. Thanks.
You know, Siri, as you were speaking, I kept expecting my book to burst into flames. Very powerful. And it falls upon the shoulders of Gianni Riotta to carry the weight of Italy. Now, Gianni had worked with Umberto in the University of Bologna, I believe. Did you? Yeah? In the Center for Communications?
I did, yes.
He, for those of you who did not know him, he's an Italian author and columnist. He's the Pirelli chair at the French and Italian department, and you'll have to forgive me another bad joke, but I hope that doesn't mean that you have to pose for the calendar. But you've heard that one.
I would, and that would be terrific. It would be a great beefcake, Michael. just between me and you.
Yes. He is also a co-director in, I saw it in a combined form, Master in Mass Communications, is that correct?
Yeah.
At the Luis University School of Government, Rome, a regular contributor to the daily newspaper La Stampa, former editor-in-chief of the financial newspaper Sole 24 Ore. He has contributed to the Washington Post, Le Monde, Foreign Policy, the New York Times. He's a member of the Council on Foreign Relations, and his books include the novel Prince of Clouds, as well as works on September 11th, on the First World War, and on life on the web, before and after, I think. So, Gianni, please. Can I speak from there? Do you mind?
Thanks very much for inviting me. And I met Umberto many years ago, when I was 17, many years ago. And I was a manager al Manifesto, a small daily leftist newspaper in Italy. I was a contributor there, and then we were together at L'Espresso magazine, the University of Bologna. We founded together one of the very first 1996 online magazine called Golem, is still running. So I may talk forever. So simply, Michael, please, when my time is over, cut me off, okay? But only because I know that I wrote what I'm going to say in my note, but our speakers have been brilliant and concise, and I will be long and dumb. So please cut me off. It is very strange for me to speak now in public, or when I wrote the obituary for La Stampa on Umberto, to write about him without it popping him up from the audience or sending me a letter in the past or a mail, say like, listen, they say that you studied with me, but you said that that was 1683. This is totally wrong. It's 1862. And I say like, what are you talking about? The book was printed there in 1683. No, actually, the guy published 2 copies in 1682, and I own one. The other one was burned in a terrible fire and blah, blah, blah. And it would come to your place and see a book in your shelf. It's like, oh, this is such a great book by Salman Rushdie. I was with Salman Rushdie. I tell you the story of the Three Musketeers. And then you say like, well, I mean, I know Salman Rushdie. I wrote about him and blah, blah. And it's like, yeah, but you know that Salman Rushdie has a book that he hasn't published yet, and actually showed me. And I told him, Salman, this is a great book, but why don't you? It was impossible to talk to Umberto without some door opening in your mind and in your life. I feel like calling him up and say like, what do you think of Trump? Is Trump really the American Berlusconi, or was Berlusconi Italian Trump? The Atlantic asked me for a column on, is Trump really a fascist? Is not. But then my son goes like, Dad, you like Trump? No, I don't like Trump, but Trump is not a fascist. And I'm very happy that I quoted Umberto in his essay on eternal fascism, that for something, in order something to be fascist, he has to be a fascist. Otherwise, it's very, very stupid to give somebody the wrong name. Umberto Eco was not Spider-Man, but he was a web man. He was a walking network. Before Google, there was Umberto Eco. Before the internet, there was Umberto Eco. I would ask him, can I borrow this book? No. Can I please borrow this book? No. But you can come at my house at Piazza Castello, where he would live with his wife Renate and with Carlotta and Stefano, his kids, and read it while we were having lunch. So I would go humbly to read the book there, feeling like a little bad, because we're going to steal the book. Of course I would have stolen the book. And I was like, this is the book I stole from Umberto Eco. And at lunch there would be like Ilya Prigozhin, famous philosopher of science, and maybe Luciano Berio, the musician, and Carlo De Palma, former director of photography for Antonioni and Woody Allen. And you would start like chatting, and of course you were like terribly humbled by all these people around there, and would brush up your saussure from school and try to think about Stravinsky and stuff. And all of a sudden, this musician, the last artisan in Italy building concertina musical instruments, not the concertina wire, but the musical instruments, and it would pop up, and this guy may be barely literate, but the last guy that is building concertina, and he was sat with Prigozhin, and they start, chatting about whether it's better to build concertina or scientific theories. And then Prigozhin would buy 3 or 4 concertinas that God knows what happened to them. And this was Umberto. He was at ease with the barman, and he was at ease with the president of the United States. He was immensely, both of you mentioned his generosity, but I was a recipient of his generosity. When I was a total nobody, I still am a total nobody, but I was, on Google would say, Gianni Riotta, Wikipedia, is a total nobody. Very short, line. He would review my books. He would give me appointments at his school. He would spend time. Drenka Villen, that I see there, knows this very well. He would spend time with us. More than that, he grew up under fascism, and you can see fascism in many of his books. And as my dad, he treasured liberty and democracy. That is not very popular, democracy. What is democracy? Come on, democracy, Berlusconi, Trump. But since they were deprived of democracy when they were kids, they really loved democracy. When Italy went through the terrorist years, many of Umberto's colleagues, friends, students were tempted by terrorists and the dystopia of the Red Brigades. In many books, in many essays, in many columns, bravely, Umberto insisted that you should fight and strive for democracy within democratic terms, on democratic terms. My generation in Italy was a very fragile, nervous generation. The country was it was a fragile democracy, a new democracy, young democracy. And many of us could have listened to the sirens of the terrorism if it wasn't for a steady voice like Umberto. He navigated us with dialogue and compassion. William of Baskerville, the name of the Rose hero, says to Azzo, fear prophets, Azzo, fear prophets. And those prepared to die for the truth. For, as a rule, they make many others die with them, often before them, at times instead of them. This was true when the Red Brigades were going around, and it's true today vis-à-vis Islamic terrorists. Umberto was an immensely learned man, and he would always quiz you to try learn many different and new things. He boasted of being a man of the left, but he would ask you, have you read Ezra Pound? No? How come? Because he's a fascist, read Ezra Pound. He fought with Pasolini, with Pier Paolo Pasolini, the movie director, another icon of the left, on homosexuality and birthright. Today, Umberto's column would not be published by any decent magazine because it was very, very controversial. I remember as a cab editor bringing to my editor the manifesto, like, what should we do with this? I cannot quote it here, guys, or Giorgio Vastrate will kick me out of the Salone. And he said, like, publish it. And he's very, because he loved to be controversial. When the Democratic Party in the early 1990s offered him to be mayor of Milan, and our great friend Walter Veltroni went to talk to him, Umberto told him, listen, I love this because I'm a leftist man, so it's a great honor for me to be proposed like this, but I'm a tenured professor. I am used that when I say, you do this, you don't do this, people listen to me, okay? If I am the mayor, I have to go in markets and talk to the people, and they will say, you're right, you're wrong. I cannot do that. Because in his way, he was a modest man, very, very, very modest man. It would be, I'm almost done, it would be impossible for me to talk about Eco without talking about Eco the comedian, Eco telling jokes, okay? I struggle, Drenka is already laughing. I struggled yesterday to find a joke that I could tell you here, mostly they were about Sicilians, because I'm Sicilian, and they were not very nice. Then there were like jokes about gays, homosexual, minorities. None of them can be read today. But there is a joke that I can tell, and it's the joke of the Jesuit theologian and the Dominican theologian that say their prayers on the sunny churchyard. And they both read the Roman Breviary, and while the Jesuit reads the Roman Breviary, he's puffing on a huge Cuban cigar. And when they're done with the prayers, the Dominican shyly approaches the Jesuit and says, like, brother, how come you were smoking? I asked permission to the Pope himself, and he sternly denied it. And the Jesuit asked with a wry smile, what did you exactly ask, venerable brother? And the Dominicans say, like, well, I went to the Pope and said, Holy Father, can I smoke while I pray? And he went into a fit yelling, are you nuts? Are you nuts? Of course you cannot. Prayer is sacred. You cannot mingle it with earthly pleasures, okay? The Jesuit says, like, too bad for you, because I went to the Holy Father and it's like, can I pray while I smoke? And he smiled and said, but of course, my dear son, you can always pray. You can always pray. Every minute of your life, you can pray.
Wonderful.
We could go, I could go, there is philosophy, there is theology, there is anti-clericalism, and he was a born comedian. When I say that he was the webman and not Spider-Man, I mean that he saw life like dots to be connected. There is actually, I like the God pendulum, but there is a statement someone says, any fact becomes important when it's connected to another. And Umberto saw life like this connection of dots. And Salman mentioned Calvino. And Calvino, the Italians, the first, Calvino wrote the famous 6 lectures for the Norton lectures, and the Italians read only the first one, leggerezza, okay? Because they love to be lightness. So that's the only one. Always say, oh, the leggerezza. They never, ever, ever arrived to the last one, that is a multiplicity. And it ends saying culture and the novel is a network. Calvino dies right after, while he was writing actually that, in 1985, and this is exactly when the web was born. And it's like, a relay, a cultural relay that he lives. Eco had a longer life, and he worked on that. Try to connect the facts in your culture, in your life, and in your personal experience. The name of the rose is called the name of the rose because the stat rosa pristina nomina nuda tenemos. Maestro, I know this is Bernardo Morlet from his 12th century opus De Contento Mundi, quoted by Huizinga. And what does it mean? He will already say, no, it wasn't Contempto Mundi, it's De Contempto Mundi tua. The line means only the name is preserved of the original ancient rose. We keep just naked names for us. It's very chilling, melancholic verse for ending a novel with. And I see Barbara Jacobson here in the front row. It really doesn't match Umberto the man, that was at his happiest with a very stiff martini. I never fixed a martini for Umberto that was stiff enough for him. Eventually, I disposed of the vermouth altogether, and he still would object to that. And of course, smoking cigarettes. We only get naked names. Umberto the semioticians explain why the names are naked and what this means for us. But Umberto the novelist and the man didn't move just out of a rational push. He was pushed by love. He was pushed by a zest for life lived to the full. He would go to a conference and then wake you up in the middle of the night and say, what time is it? 3 o'clock, let's go out. Okay, and there would find this stone and start telling you the story of the sun. The final line, Umberto Eco tells us we are given just naked names, nomina nuda, and so it's our job now to try to connect all the different languages, all the different cultures. Keep laughing, keep working. Maestro, scusami per tutte le cavolate che ho detto e mi manchi tanto. Grazie.
Now that we're away from the more programmatic part, do you have any questions for each other, first of all?
Why didn't you like the Foucault panel? No, I'm positive I read the review then, but I don't remember. Why did I not like it?
Yeah.
Poor Salman.
I'm not going to answer that. On the record, I'm not going to answer that. Well, read the review. It's a really, really rude review. I wanted to say, talking about the perfect martini, I don't know if Umberto knew this, but in the autobiography of Luis Buñuel, he has the formula for the perfect dry martini, and he compares it to the Immaculate Conception of Christ.
Yes, he does.
And he says, this is because to make the perfect dry martini, you must take a martini glass, put an olive in it, and then fill it to the top with gin, and then place a bottle of vermouth next to the glass in such a way that a single shaft of sunlight goes through the bottle of vermouth and strikes the glass, and then you drink the martini.
That's the solution. I thought of it too right away.
Yeah, I'm
it's
sure
a great
Umberto must
passage.
have known this, because that's a great autobiography, Mon Dernier Soupir, of Luis Buñuel.
We actually, since the name of the rose has come up so much in your conversations, I've asked Edoardo to do a little reading from the conclusion, where, of course, he explains what mystery is.
Yeah.
Solving a mystery is not the same as deducing from first principles. Nor does it amount simply to collecting a number of particular data from which to infer a general law. It means, rather, facing one or two or three particular data, apparently with nothing in common, and trying to imagine whether they could represent so many instances of a general law you don't yet know, and which perhaps has never been pronounced. To be sure, if you know, as the philosopher says, that man, the horse, and the mule are all without bile, and are all long-lived, you can venture the principle that animals without bile live a long time. But take the case of animals with horns. Why do they have horns? Suddenly you realize that all animals with horns are without teeth in the upper jaw. This would be a fine discovery if you did not also realize that, alas, there are animals without teeth in the upper jaw who, however, do not have horns. The camel, to name one. And finally, you realize that all animals without teeth in the upper jaw have 4 stomachs. Well, then, you can suppose that one who cannot chew well must need 4 stomachs to digest food better. But what about the horns? You then try to imagine a material cause for horns. Say the lack of teeth provides the animal with an excess of osseous matter that must emerge somewhere else. But is that sufficient explanation? No, because the camel has no upper teeth, has 4 stomachs, but does not have horns. And you must also imagine a final cause. The osseous matter emerges in horns only in animals without other means of defense. But the camel has a very tough hide and doesn't need horns. So the law could be, but what have horns to do with anything? I asked impatiently. And why are you concerned with animals having horns? I've never concerned myself with them, but the Bishop of Lincoln was greatly interested in them, pursuing an idea of Aristotle. Honestly, I don't know whether his conclusions are the right ones, nor have I ever checked to see where the camel's teeth are or how many stomachs he has. I was trying to tell you that the search for explicative laws in natural facts proceeds in tortuous fashion. In the face of some inexplicable facts, you must try to imagine many general laws whose connection with your facts escapes you. Then suddenly, in the unexpected connection of a result, a specific situation, and one of those laws, you perceive a line of reasoning that seems more convincing than the others. You try applying it to all similar cases, to use it for making predictions, and you discover that your intuition was right. But until you reach the end, you will never know which predicates to introduce into your reasoning and which to omit. And this is what I am doing now. I line up so many disjointed elements, and I venture some hypotheses. I have to venture many, and many of them are so absurd that I would be ashamed to tell them to you. You see, in the case of the horse Brunellus, when I saw the clues, I guessed many complementary and contradictory hypotheses. It could be a runaway horse. It could be that the abbot had ridden down the slope on that fine horse. It could be that one horse, Brunellus, had left the tracks in the snow, and another horse, Favellus, the day before, the traces of mane in the bush, and the branches could have been broken by some men. I didn't know which hypothesis was right until I saw the cellarer and the servants anxiously searching. Then I understood that the Brunellus hypothesis was the only right one, and I tried to prove it true, addressing the monks as I did. I won, but I might also have lost. The others believed me wise because I won, but they didn't know the many instances in which I have been foolish because I lost. And they didn't know that a few seconds before winning, I wasn't sure I wouldn't lose. Now, for the events of the Abbey, I have many fine hypotheses, but there is no evident fact that allows me to say which is best. So rather than appear foolish afterward, I renounce seeming clever now. Let me think no more until tomorrow at least. I understood at that moment my master's method of reasoning, and it seemed to me quite alien to that of the philosopher, who reasons by first principles, so that his intellect almost assumes the ways of the divine intellect. I understood that when he didn't have an answer, William proposed many to himself, very different one from another. I remained puzzled.
I don't know if this evening has been a stiff martini, but maybe it's been a perfect one. So I think we could close it off now just with a few words in Italian from Giorgio van Straten, and again from the last pages of Il nome della rosa.
It is a beautiful evening, and I'm grateful to you all for this, but I think that we have to close with the real voice of Eco in Italian. Più rileggo questo elenco, più mi convinco che esso è effetto del caso e non contiene alcun messaggio. Ma queste pagine incomplete mi hanno accompagnato per tutta la vita che da allora mi è restata da vivere. Le ho spesso consultate come un oracolo e ho quasi l'impressione che quanto scritto su questi fogli, che tu ora leggerai, ignoto lettore, altro non sia che un centone, un carme a figura, un immenso acrostico che non dice e non ripete altro che ciò che quei frammenti mi hanno suggerito. Ne so più se io abbia sinora parlato di essi o essi abbiano parlato per bocca mia. Ma quale delle due venture si sia data, più recito a me stesso la storia che ne è sortita, meno riesco a capire se in essa vi sia una trama che vada al di là della sequenza naturale degli eventi e dei tempi che li connettono. Ed è cosa dura per questo vecchio monaco, alle soglie della morte, non sapere se la lettera che ha scritto contenga un qualche senso nascosto e se più d'uno e molti o nessuno. Ma questa mia inabilità a vedere è forse effetto dell'ombra che la grande tenebra che si avvicina sta gettando sul mondo incanutito. Est ubi gloria nunc Babilonia? Dove sono le nevi di un tempo? La terra danza la danza di Macabre, Mi sembra a tratti che il Danubio sia percorso da battelli carichi di folli che vanno verso un luogo oscuro. Non mi rimane che tacere. Fa freddo nello scriptorium. Il pollice mi duole. Lascio questa scrittura non so per chi, non so più intorno a che cosa. Stat rosa pristina nomine, nomina nuda tenemus. Grazie.
Thank you, everyone. Good evening. The festival continues on this weekend, so please do check out penn.org for some of the various events. And buona serata.
It was good. I thought it went very well. Really, it was wonderful, I have to say. Really, thank you.
I never compare anything.